Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. It's the third day, so well done you for being here this morning. Delighted, of course, to be sharing this discussion today with some of my favorite people in the business. He was one of my first bosses, so you know. Andrew's already given us a bit of an overview of who these wonderful gentlemen are, but maybe we can start by just doing a quick round of introductions to explain how you connect to this theme, and then we'll get started on discussing the UK critical minerals strategy, but also what it means in terms of connecting the criticality and the responsibility stakes and connecting very domestic stakes with international relations. So these are some of the key pillars that we'll be discussing today. But shall we start with Jeff?
Marvellous, thank you. I'm Jeff Townsend. I'm the founder of the Critical Minerals Association. We started in the UK almost 3 years ago now, just before COVID. Great timing. But we have recently launched CMA Australia, which is an Australian domestic one, and we have CMA Canada and USA on the way as well. And the whole point was about bringing together the industry to give it that voice and be able to influence decision makers like Matt.
Morning, everybody. Guy Hatcher, Technical Director at Green Lithium. We're building a merchant lithium refinery in the northeast of the UK in Teesside, principally focused on processing spodumene concentrate to produce lithium chemicals, and increasingly important, from a UK and European perspective, to build out that midstream capacity. We think, and we're limited as a UK and as a continent in terms of the raw material endowment, but by onshoring or nearshoring some of that midstream capacity, we think we will be able to advance critical mineral security issues by controlling that piece of the supply chain.
Good morning, I'm Matt Hatfield. I'm from the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, where I'm the Head of Policy for Critical Minerals. I was also the lead official on the development of the UK's critical minerals strategy this year.
I'm Jeremy Wrathall. I'm the founder and CEO of Cornish Lithium company. I started in 2016. I'm a mining engineer by background, and then worked in investment banking for most of my career, and then started at Cornish Lithium in 2016. So really we are will be extracting or pioneering the extraction of lithium from brine, geothermal brines, and also from a hard rock project in Cornwall, just near St Austell. So that's me, and I'm on the Critical Minerals Committee for the UK government in my capacity, not as Cornish Lithium, but in my experience in metals and mining.
Thanks. So we have literally got every aspect of the UK critical minerals agenda sitting right here. Let's start off perhaps by asking about the list, and beyond the list, what are the uses, whether a list is a useful tool, how do we optimize its value? And maybe let's start with you, Matt, as the creator of the list.
Sure. So it was interesting to hear the previous panel talk a bit about how they thought about criticality. In the UK government, in my department, we think specifically about the security of supply of these minerals for manufacturers in the UK and promoting the resilience of those supply chains. And so the first step in our development of the critical minerals strategy was to undertake a criticality assessment. We commissioned the British Geological Survey to undertake that assessment using a well-established methodology. And that methodology looks at essentially two dimensions. The first is economic importance, and the second is global supply risk. And there are a whole host of metrics and indexes that sit underneath those dimensions, but when you assess across those dimensions, that gives us our kind of basis, our evidence base for defining a list of critical minerals. You'll see the UK's list, 18 minerals on the UK's lists, subtly different from lists in Europe, in America and Australia and so on. Each country having their own intelligence around these mineral supply chains and their own interests that they factor into them. A really important point that I'd like to make about the UK's critical minerals list a lot of people approach me and say, why is my mineral, my favourite mineral, not on the UK's list? It's a dynamic list. We're operating with the best evidence base that we've got at the moment, and surely it will evolve over time. So it's a snapshot of a dynamic situation. So I think that's an important caveat when we talk about criticality.
And the list is a tool for various uses, and I think all of us were discussing what that list entails, both in terms of the businesses you operate, and even more widely, the political use that can be made of this tool. Yeah. And I think you're seeing different uses already in the countries where the CMA is starting to have operations and...
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's interesting about the list as well is it's not just the critical minerals list, it also has a watch list around it of those that are potentially of interest, and as that changes, we'll see things moving in and out. So I think that's a really interesting dynamic to our list. And I think the way that the critical minerals list is used domestically is really interesting. So Whitehall is a leviathan, or a hydra, if you will, and many different departments, and all have a different interest in the critical minerals, all find different ones useful. And so what that list has been able to do is to bring different departments together. So unlike other nations where there's a mining ministry, in the UK there are 5 or 6 departments. They all listen to Matt, and Matt is the lead, but they're all slightly different. So it gives a stick, if you will, for Whitehall to say, right, this department, this is what we're focused on, this is what we need to go and do. So I think that's a really useful thing. And then with that, it's enabled us also to build up international relations with nations, some of which had probably fallen off the diplomatic radar of the UK, some that we had forgotten that we were close cousins to and we are starting to build, but that has focused minds and focused efforts. And I think that's really been very, very useful since 2016, should we say.
As you're setting up CMA in Canada and in Australia, you're seeing much, I imagine that there's mostly agreement in terms of the broad, what's on the list and how Canada, Australia and UK define critical minerals. Is there any specific different approaches, or is it largely consistent messaging between the...
There is consistency. I'm looking and I can see Quebec and Saskatchewan in the audience. So I think across Canada you have different provinces that have different views on what critical minerals are, and of course Canada. Yeah. Please don't quote me, but I'm sure that the list is about what they can supply into the world, whereas necessarily ours is downstream based. So what do we need to build the automotive sector, to build the renewable energy, defence, satellites, etc.
And I mean, Guy and Jeremy, you're both really active on one of the most critical of the criticals. And does the strategy, does the list create better attention, more focus? Are you seeing an increased level of support as a result of the state and private sector finding a bit of an agreement or a platform for driving future strategy?
From our perspective, yeah, absolutely. We're starting to see, it helps initiate the conversation. It's something to talk around, if nothing else, but also it's important to know that it's on the government agenda. We're not going to solve this pretty major challenge of critical mineral security without it being on a government agenda, and the start of that is good policy work that Matt and the team are doing, and laying that foundation to know that it's on the radar, know that it's got traction in the civil service and in government, and also it needs international collaboration. So it's important that those things are running in parallel with other critical mineral strategies in our partner nations and with others around the world.
And do you find that it's helping with the social acceptability of future domestic production?
Absolutely, it's essential. The list, we were sort of late as a nation to this particular party because the EU and the US put out their lists first, and that really drew attention to the fact that this is a race. This is a race to secure the minerals that we need to transition. Without the minerals, or most of which are on the list, we won't transition to electric vehicles, we won't transition to renewable energy, and that is the critical thing that we are all as a whole world is facing, is to move away from burning stuff to metal interactions between, to exchanging electrons between metals and other raw materials. And if those metals aren't highlighted, then this transition won't happen. And the UK government is committed to all electric vehicles by 2030. So really, that list highlights which metals those are to a large extent. And it really helps focus, therefore, on what we're trying to do, what Green Lithium are trying to do in the UK to build out that supply chain. If we don't have a supply chain, we don't have an automotive industry, and we lose 800,000 jobs. It's pretty serious.
And Guy, you were mentioning the necessity of focusing on the midstream angle, and do you think that the UK there is positioning competitively compared to others? How's the strategy supporting that part of the
In and of itself,
reposition?
I'm not just, the midstream is not by itself, isn't the be all and end all. It absolutely needs, this industry is, and the opportunity at the moment is, once in a generational sort of new supply chains being built at the moment, and needs natural resources projects like the good work that Cornish Lithium and the team are doing down in the southwest. My background is an exploration mine geo. I'd love to see some lithium production going on in the UK. It's absolutely fantastic. But yeah, the facts are that Europe, such a large downstream demand of automotive, such a strong automotive sector in Europe, mainland Europe, but also in the UK. We just don't have the raw material endowment that satisfies that local supply chain. So if we want to have some security, you can't move a mineral resource. It is where it is. That's the nature of it. But you can move the refining and processing step. You can strategically position those. So we think in order to add some diversification to the supply chain, everyone in the room will know that it's pretty exposed at the moment. It's 90% of the world's hard rock refining is happening in China. It absolutely makes sense to try and add some diversification to that supply chain through strategic midstream refining, we think.
And I think the old saying, if you fail to plan or fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. So this is the first absolutely vital step in preparing to succeed. We want to move to electric vehicles. We know that if you don't have any lithium, it's a bit like the buyer for an automotive company going to his boss and saying, unfortunately, boss, I didn't buy any lithium this year, and therefore not only does he lose his job, but the whole car company goes out the window. So I see the list as the absolute core recognition from the government that we're on a journey.
So Matt, how does all of this perspective feature in your processes? We know that there's been an announcement, there's been a list. What's next, and where are you taking all of these perspectives for the next steps?
Sure. So the list was the sort of foundational piece of work for establishing a critical minerals strategy. So a bit of history. In 2021, the UK government published a couple of important reports that set the scene for the strategy. The first was an integrated review of foreign policy and security, and the second was the UK's net zero strategy. And they both recognise critical minerals as an important risk to achieving our climate goals and from a geopolitical perspective as well. So that set the scene for us to develop the critical minerals strategy. The strategy, as I say, really comes at it from an angle of promoting resilience of supply chains and ensuring the security of supply of these minerals for UK manufacturers. And for the critical products that we rely on, whether it's in clean energy like electric vehicles and wind turbines and solar panels, or other technologies that we rely on for daily life, and even defense equipment, and the list goes on. So the strategy sets out three pillars of how the UK can approach this. The first is about accelerating domestic capabilities in critical minerals. So that's about producing what we can domestically, where it works for our communities and our natural environment, and where it's viable for businesses to do so. It's also about skills and R&D and promoting a circular economy here in the UK for critical minerals. The second pillar is about international partnerships and collaborating with international partners. And that's looking at working closely with our allies, both bilaterally and through multilateral partnerships. And it's about promoting and exporting UK businesses and the expertise that we have in the UK around the world to build these, to participate in building these alternative, diverse and resilient supply chains. And then the third part of the strategy is about enhancing international markets and making them more responsive and more making market forces more effective, and also importantly promoting a responsible supply. And I'm sure we'll come on later in the panel to talk a bit about why it's important that we have responsibility in these supply chains, and that's an important part of our strategy. So that all wraps together into the UK strategy. We're obviously going for a process now, having published that at the end of the summer, to look at how we can implement that as government, how we can work with industry and academia and finance and other stakeholders to deliver on the ambitions that strategy sets out.
And actually, Jeff, the CMA brings together a lot of these convergent, divergent, different interests, from industrial outputs to the midstream to potential producers.
Yep.
How are you seeing the next steps of the implementation?
I think that's really interesting. So, as Matt said, the strategy is ACE, and I'm very happy that Jeremy and Guy both are part of our membership. But yeah, I think the industry has really kind of rallied around this, and because there has been a voice, we're starting to see everyone from exploration through to the likes of British Volt, who are our members, starting to rally around it, pull together and find collaborative ways of working with that, which has been marvellous. But then on top of that, we understand that not everything can be done domestically. So how do we give the UK, so CMA UK, how does that support, and how does its members support it to give the UK the best chance of delivering its industrial strategy? So 800,000 jobs in the automotive sector. Right, so if we don't have a supply chain for that, then you know, what happens to 800,000 people and their families? That's quite a scary thought. So we're building relationships around the world, and you know, that's part of our job is to help bring those conversations into the fold. But yeah, I think, you know, where we were in 2018, 2019 to the discussions we have today and the collaboration across industry, it's a sea change from where we were.
And Guy, maybe I want to rebound on what you were saying, because of course you produce for somebody, so your output is key, but the integrated project in and of itself has direct economic impact. So how do you feature that as part of your strategy for green lithium?
Integrated project how? Sorry, Ludivine.
Your project being linked to production as well as the outputs for industry.
Sure.
And then of course you creating your own jobs and economic impact regionally.
Yeah. It's absolutely important for us to develop long-term, stable supply relationships. We don't own our own assets. We're sort of presenting a merchant refining model where we're offering optionality to the existing upstream miner market, really. Largely, if you're not an integrated miner or refiner at the moment, and you're in the hard rock sphere, you're sending your material to China, and there's a real appetite to diversify their offtake base away. And I'm not suggesting in the near term that China's not going to play a major role in this. I mean, there's a huge catch-up to do for the rest of the world. But there is a recognition, motivation, real interest from a lot of these senior mining exec teams and from some of the up-and-coming groups, lithium projects that have booths here this week around, you know, it makes sense, but a partial diversification of their offtake base. You don't know market, regardless of where you are, wants to be, you know, single customer, single origin operations. Too much risk in that sort of supply chain. So, yeah, we're working on building long-term, stable, collaborative partnerships whereby, you know, looking at developing those relationships with a number of interested parties. I wanted to just back on one of your first comments, Ludivine, around, you know, UK critical minerals strategy. Is it you know, how we're using it, or how has it landed? It's also a really important signal for the investor community that it's being taken seriously. They want to know that it's a good signal, and they want to know that government recognises it and has policy in place to support it if we're going to create an environment which is you know, welcoming for investors. Need as many signals as they can get.
And Jeremy, I mean, you're also in a very local context and building a lot of local content. So we were talking about social acceptability, but even more widely, the economic impact is a big part of the positioning for your project.
It certainly is. I mean, the UK by 2030 needs about 80,000 tonnes of lithium a year, lithium carbonate equivalent. So there's a huge opportunity across the country, including green lithium, including projects that we're trying to do, including the projects in Wrathall and Northern Lithium, to actually create economic value add and boost the economy across by producing those critical minerals. And of course, there's also Cornish Metals bringing on the Cornish tin mining industry. That's going to create 300,000 jobs. That's another critical metal. So it's very important that if we've got the opportunity here to manufacture or directly or process these metals here to create economic value add, rather than doing that elsewhere, that we do it here. And then is it socially acceptable? Well, absolutely, because in Cornwall, where we are, there's been a 4,000-year history of mining and 275 years of China clay mining. There's very well-known industry, and a lot of Cornish people, in fact, most Cornish people, it seems, want to see this come back. And it is a material boost to their economy.
It's a refreshing change from the general rejection of mining worldwide.
Absolutely. No, we've seen no opposition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings us to the third pillar you were discussing, which is standards, and standards linking to responsibility in particular. So whether it's the responsibility of production or the traceability of production through integrated, more transparent supply chains, I think that's at the heart of all of our consideration right now. So I see Jeff nodding.
Well, so we all want to build a green, better tomorrow, right? So you can't do that if you accept irresponsibility today. It just doesn't work. You can't do things in a bad way now, saying it's okay because we're building a better tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. So being ESG compliant has got to be absolutely factored in from the very beginning. Life cycle assessments, traceability, all the technology that happens. So you look at the work that Jeremy's done down in Cornwall, or Green Lithium are doing. It's brilliant to see that. And the more that I guess what we can do by having domestic and having as much as we can in the UK or in partner nations, is you have better oversight of those ESG compliance throughout the entirety of that supply chain. I think that's absolutely important. It does add another level of criticality. Some might say that at some point you're going to have lithium and you're going to have ESG compliant lithium, and where do we end up with that? Is there going to be a price difference, etc.? But the first thing is that everyone should be doing what they can to do it the right way from the beginning.
Yeah, standards are a double-edged sword, but I mean, we were talking about the value of processing happening also in a space where we can attest for the responsibility of the process as well as the sourcing, and that's a key part of what you're building.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it clues in the name, Green Lithium. We're sort of putting a cross on our forehead to be held to account for our environmental credentials, and it's front and center in the business. But there's no two ways about it. Refining is an energy intensive process. There's a thermal step and a high electrical demand. But by taking control of that process, and that's why actually one of the reasons why we really like the UK is an opportunity to put midstream capacity in. It's things like access to hydrogen in the northeast of the UK is a strong and developing hydrogen economy. It's looking at, so we've selected a calcination technology in the roasting stage that is able to take hydrogen as a combustion fuel or natural gas or a blend of both. So as that hydrogen economy develops, we'll be transitioning or incorporating hydrogen as a combustion fuel, and that's a real opportunity for carbon savings. There's no silver bullet for like carbon net zero in industrial processes. It's about incremental gains wherever you can get them, and it's sort of a total solution. So there's things like the hydrogen piece, but there's also offshore wind in the UK is strong, and tapping into that renewable offshore wind infrastructure is important. There's carbon capture, there's heat recycling. It's looking at putting things engineering by design. So as you're going through that design phase, looking at, we're challenging our engineering partners to put that front and center. Where can they make savings? How can they be efficient by doing so? And we think there are some really significant opportunities for reducing that total, focusing on the carbon footprint of the refining step. And one of the, like Jeff says, it's one of the first pieces of work that we did was a carbon life cycle assessment with Minvero, really good environmental consultant based out of London. If people are not aware of the work they do, it's really strong. But it's about using that as a tool. It's not a tick box exercise to do once you're in production. Say we've done a carbon life cycle assessment. We're using it as understanding where the pressure points are, and then using that to focus on how to reduce those, and sort of using it to help inform the design phase. That's why we wanted to do it early on. But there's some great opportunities, and I know that Jeremy and the team down in Cornish Lithium have got some great opportunities as well.
Yeah, because there's doing it and there's being seen to do it. So the reporting aspect of what you're doing is almost as important as the fact that you're truly engaging.
And absolutely. I think we take reporting and standards very, very seriously, because we realise if we mess this up, then Cornwall doesn't have an industry, got the benefits of that industry. So we take it extremely seriously in terms of ESG, in terms of everything we report. Very careful. We're not a listed company, we're private, so we don't have to do that. We produced our first sustainability report this year, which is very unusual for a private company, because we take it extremely seriously. Social license to operate. If you mess it up, that's gone. So, yeah, take it.
And Matt, I don't want to put you on the spot, but there's a lot of discussion about standards, again, as a double-edged sword in trade, competition and in the competitive international arena. And with the events in Ukraine, we've seen different materials suddenly being rediscussed in terms of what the objectives are and how far we go to source green, basically. Is that part of what is in the ongoing conversation about criticality? How do we factor in the competitive aspect, and how do you position on the flurry of standards?
Yeah, and that's a big question for the UK and the government and participants in the supply chains. I think we're seeing, when we talk to UK manufacturers across a range of different sectors, they're driving demand for responsibly sourced minerals, and so it's coming from that end of the supply chain. And then when we talk to players within the supply chain, whether it's miners or refiners or midstream processing companies, the first thing they want to talk to you about is their ESG standards. So we're seeing a big focus on environmental, social and governance standards, and it's becoming a competitive differentiating factor for some companies that they can prove or demonstrate certain standards. What I want to say from a kind of from my policy area in particular, whilst I've got lots of colleagues across different departments in Whitehall who are very much focused on the development priorities and the benefits to communities and to the environment of these standards, we also see there being a direct benefit to the security of supply through these responsible sourcing and environmental and social and governance standards. We think that more responsibly sourced minerals or more responsible supply chains are also more resilient supply chains. They're less prone to disruption, they've got a better social license to operate, and it also levels the playing field for UK businesses and other businesses from other jurisdictions that share the UK's priorities in this space. So it's not only a nice to have and a kind of a development priority, it's also driving security of supply.
And that would feature high on your international collaboration agenda, because clearly securing a level playing field is the aim of such collaboration, and standards are a tool for that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? So if you can do stuff domestically and shorten those transports, etc., and generate levelling up and jobs, then of course you shouldn't. It gives you better oversight of ESG. But the UK is relatively small, and we're never going to be able to do all of it. So we need to have those international partners to do it. There are a multitude of ESG standards, as you all know, that are out there. We don't need any more new ESG standards, but we need to find and refine that list down to those that work understanding that they play different roles within the supply chain as it is, and then try and get collaboration across multiple nations. Because that feeds then into things like trade agreements, into free port access, and making it easier to move products globally throughout those partner nations. That increases, that creates an ESG compliant market, which is really good, and it also enables security of supply. So you get from, we're moving from just in time supply chains to just in case supply chains, but it's the way back, if you get what I mean, and that's an interesting journey. It'll take some time. But that's what we are seeing. We are seeing across multiple jurisdictions the desire to have aligned standards on ESG and all the benefits, as Matt just said.
We often hear a counter-narrative saying, yeah, but some actors don't have to compete with the burden of that type of compliance.
Yes.
And therefore, there may be an opportunity, so to speak, for a race to the bottom. I think we can all agree that actually value creation in the longer term is the race probably to the top of that value chain, not in terms of upstream, downstream, but in terms of quality of doing it. Yeah. So, I mean, how do you all position on that narrative of some people don't have to bear the burden of the standards?
It's a really interesting point, because I think some in the mining industry would thrive on that. But if you're the customer, the BMW, Mercedes, they want to know that the material going into their cars, because they're getting asked as well, where's it coming from? So the people who haven't got those standards just can't compete against that. They will not have the market. So everything with blockchain is now checkable. And where's it come from? Has it been produced sustainably? What's the carbon footprint? We're moving into a world where people actually do care about that. Before it was like, well, yeah, it's a piece of copper, who cares? I don't care where it's come from. Now it's like it's a piece of copper, but where has it come from? And all those standards you referred to earlier, it has to be sourced ethically, or else people simply won't buy those cars. Yeah. So it's a brave new world.
And if we think about like the application of social media to that, right?
Yeah.
So the downstream car manufacturers in this case are going to have the spotlight on them more so than the rest of the supply chain. Failure there, they're the ones who are going to get called out for it. So they are desperate to ensure that their supply chain is ESG compliant. And society cares now. You know, I heard an interesting thing. I was in Parliament the other day, and I heard about social capitalism, which my generation is probably a bit too old, but this younger generation coming through are adding an economic value to their morals or their ethics in terms of what they're willing to spend. Absolutely. So a drink that was £1.80, they'll spend £2 on it, and they'll willingly do so and willingly pay over what it was because they believe in the ESG behind it. That's decades it's going to take to go through, but it's an interesting journey.
And to that point, the other thing in sourcing capital for mining projects, the first thing that people read now is not the P&L and the balance sheet, it's the sustainability report. Yeah. Are you doing this properly? It's a complete sea change from when I started. Straight away you go for the P&L and the balance sheet. Of course that's important, but everyone goes for that. The biggest thing young people think about nowadays is climate change. And if you're not doing that properly, you won't get the money, you won't get the customers.
Exactly. Without sounding too righteous, it's the right thing to do, isn't it? I mean, and there's no, as Jeff said at the beginning, there's no point in, there's two opportunities here. It's a great economic and industrial opportunity, but also we're delivering on the environmental agenda, it's energy transition piece, and there's not really any point in doing one without the other, and it's absolutely possible to achieve both. That yes, it has to be a profitable operation, and that's absolutely possible, while still upholding and implementing strong ESG standards.
How does this feature in your sourcing strategy? Because we were discussing your strategy for international sourcing.
Absolutely, it's important. So not all spodumene projects are equal. We look at their energy mix. If it's a dense media plant or a float plant, there's more electrical demand on float material. Looking at the grid mix of those projects. The S part, there are international projects coming online. Western Australia is currently the largest producing sort of region, but increasingly we'll see projects coming online on the African continent, in South America, in North America, Europe, and everyone's got different, there are different approaches, different government, different sort of local licenses to operate in all those jurisdictions. So being conscious of those local politics is super important.
And you were mentioning that very much the UK critical mineral strategy was driven by the need of UK manufacturers. Mm-hmm. So the output of those industries is key to driving the success for the entire value chain you're structuring. How does that feature in the international collaboration agenda and where you're taking those relationships?
Yeah, so international collaboration is a key pillar of the strategy. We recognize that it's not possible or even desirable to try and on-source, the whole supply chains. It's very much a kind of global challenge and a global market. Driving international relationships is important. I can see people in the audience from some of our closest international partners who we're having active discussions with about how partnerships can form and what the UK has to add to those partnerships. I think in the UK we have a strong offer to our international partnerships. In fact, it's one of the differentiating factors, perhaps, or an advantage that the UK has that we have strong international relationships and diplomatic relationships around the world, and companies that operate overseas, UK companies that operate overseas, benefit from that in our mining majors and mining finance, and a variety of other companies that participate in those supply chains. So we think we have plenty to offer in those partnerships, and we're very pleased to be collaborating with important partners and also to be part of some really key multilateral and plurilateral initiatives that are taking place as well.
We haven't left a lot of time for your questions. I don't know if there are some questions that anybody in the audience wants to raise.
I think we can just take time for one question from the floor, and then I just have to go to this gentleman here. Put his hand up first. If you just give your name.
Hi, Constantine Bourne from the University of Oxford. First of all, it's great news to hear that the UK is doing a little bit more in the critical minerals space, so it's very welcome. We've obviously heard over the last couple of days that there's going to be a very big supply gap of critical minerals. So now it's the UK's strategy to obviously make sure that these critical minerals come into the value chains here in the UK and are available for manufacturers here. However, one of the issues that I see is that the UK doesn't really have any funding available right now, either for midstream companies or for upstream suppliers that want to bring resource to the UK. And that's very different from the peers. If we look at the EU, if we look at the US, if we look at Australia or Canada. So I guess my question to the panel is, will more funding need to be committed in order for the UK to actually attract some of these resources in light of the global competition? And if so, what kind of funding opportunity would have to be given to different subsects in the value chain?
Good question.
Just to answer in part, I mean, just from Green Lithium's perspective, we have received grant support from the Automotive Transformation Fund. It's some of the first capital we received a couple of years ago, actually, and we found it absolutely helpful and supported and encouraged private sector investment in ourselves. So it did the trick in encouraging private investment, and that was welcome. Can UK government do more? Absolutely. And I don't know how are we comparing now in a dynamic, how is UK government comparing in what is the dynamic and super fast evolving market? Obviously what's happening in North America is we need to be aware of it and look at, is there an appropriate and equivalent, or at least more of a UK response? It would be welcome.
I mean, yes, the UK through its UKRI, it has done a lot of investing into lower TRL projects or early stage projects, which has been really good. But they're relatively small amounts of money, and they're not particularly designed to go to commercialization. So there is a gap in there. There isn't much money out there. Don't worry, Matt. I'm not going to make you promise billions. Would we like to see a fund of billions? Of course, everyone would. That would make things a lot easier. But if we were to be a little bit more creative, perhaps there's ways that you can underwrite offtake. So if you underwrite offtake, you reduce risk. Reduce risk, you drive investment. That's potentially a way that the UK could do it without spending huge amounts of money to security of supply. Just thinking.
Nice one.
Yeah.
Matt.
Last quick comment. I think this myth that the UK government isn't supporting financially companies is sort of dispelled by the two gentlemen sitting next to me who've both received grant support from the government. You know, the Automotive Transformation Fund is just one example of funds that we have to support supply chains in specific sectors in the UK. We also have UK Export Finance that's helping companies, including mining companies, to export their services overseas, and recently announced, for example, the Clean Energy Innovation Facility expanding to think a bit about critical minerals to the order of I think about 65 million pounds in promoting development of innovation in developing countries. So that there are pots of money out there. Of course, we're kind of exploring alternatives, but we do, I think, given that there are these existing facilities, we do have to think carefully about how we use taxpayers' money to promote this in the most effective way that we can.
Thanks. I think we have totally run out of time, and Andrew does not look like he's kidding with it, so we will wrap it up for today. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you to all of you. And,
thank you very much.